I'm Dr. Adam Martinez. I'm the Associate Director here at the Center for Faith and Culture, and it is my privilege this morning to introduce our first speaker. I would also like to recognize Father Jeffrey Steenson, who is in the back, who is also on our staff at the Center for Faith and Culture as well. So thank you, Father, for joining us again. Father Donald Nesti will speak to us about the sociological context of marriage, within the American context, I should say. Father Nesti is the director of the Center for Faith and Culture. He has also been the provincial superior of the Congregation of the Holy Spirit, and he has served in various capacities, including serving as president of Duquesne University as well. Well published. He's lectured extensively, given lots of conferences, presentations, workshops. He's just a phenomenal leader, and we are very, very blessed to have him with us. So please help me to welcome Father Donald Nesti.
Well, you know, I found the most interesting question that you gave me last night, as you wrote it down, was, how do I begin a relationship? Now, wouldn't you think that we all know how to do that? It should be the most natural thing for us, that we should be able to just step out and begin a relationship. We have our icebreakers here. Peter leads us in the prayer. We stand up, we sit down, and so forth and so on. But why is it that people in our culture still feel very alienated, feel marginalized, experience an excruciating loneliness, and wonder if they're ever going to find anybody with whom they can relate? When we live in a culture, and you know, there are 1,000 different ways to describe culture, but culture itself means this, that we in a society share a way of life. And that way of life contains within it certain expected patterns of behavior. Our culture is meant to give us toolkits to live out those expected patterns of behavior. And we as Americans work with several toolkits. And we all have them in our own head. And we have them in ourselves. But two of these toolkits underlie two of the highest scores that we get as Americans, as I told you yesterday. Remember the two statistics which are the highest for Americans that I told you about? This is a wonderful book. It's called Marriage Go Round, and I'm going to talk to you about that a little bit. Because what you're talking about here today and what we're talking about here today not only has an impact on you personally, although that is very important to you, how can I begin a relationship? This has a fallout, a cultural fallout, which is incredible. You remember the two statistics I gave you yesterday? The one is that 90% of Americans believe in marriage. 90%. This is higher than any other Western country that there is. And at the same time, we score again high. Americans have a higher rate of divorce than any other country in the West. Now, how do you reconcile those two things? Everybody wants marriage. And you know, even all of this debate over same-sex marriages and so forth, notice it's about marriage. It's about relationship. It's about what people want in relationship. And it just is phenomenal how, whether you are thinking in monogamous, heterosexual marriages or same-sex marriages or unions or whatever you want to call it, everybody wants a relationship. And yet we rank so high. 1 out of 2 marriages end in divorce. Okay? 1 out of 2. It's half in divorce. So what are the toolkits that are underlying these two things? We want marriage, and yet we are experiencing divorce. American cultural model of marriage contains the following elements. This is what we believe about marriage. When people are asked, well, do you want marriage? Yeah, I believe in marriage. What are some of the elements? First of all, we believe that marriage is the best way to live one's family life. Secondly, we believe that a marriage should be permanent, and it should be a loving relationship. Thirdly, a marriage should be sexually exclusive partnership. Now, that's surprising, isn't it? You wouldn't think that. And divorce should be a last resort. This should not surprise us, because we who are believers in what Jeff Crandall was talking about last night in creation and marriage and so forth, we believe that we are created for relationships, and we are created for loving relationships. We believe that God has created us so that we transcend ourselves in love for the other. That's what's underlying this longing for marriage. But we have the highest rate of divorce in any Western nation. Why? Because way back when, the foundation was laid for what we call individualism. Individualism. Listen to what this author says. What a nation's early history does is give it a set of leanings and tendencies. So this is rooted way back in the founding of this republic. And when you take my course on faith in American culture, then we go into this really deeply. We go all the way back to Jerusalem, and then to Greece, and then to Rome, and then to London, and then to Philadelphia, and we try to look at how this all unfolds, okay? In an initial position, it gives us initial position. The initial position of American family was different from that of British family and the French family of the same period. That's most clear in the case of divorce, which was not allowed in Britain or France before 1800. Couldn't get a divorce, even though Henry VIII had a few little things there. But you know what he did? He had annulments, okay? And then he wanted the divorce. He didn't get the divorce, and then he got mad, all right? This persistent difference is an example of what social scientists sometimes call path dependence. In other words, you are set out on a trajectory. The ground is laid here. It may be small. You have to be independent. You have to rely on yourself. You have to be the self-made person. You have to make your own way. You can determine what is going to make you happy, and we will assure you of the right to pursue happiness. However you define that, we're going to give you that. Life, liberty, and a pursuit of happiness. It doesn't say you're going to get happiness. You can pursue it. You're the individual. You can go ahead. You create whatever you want. You go for it. Social science is sometimes called path dependence. The principle that societies that are different in important ways early on are likely to remain different later, even if their recent experiences are similar. And this underlies the difference in the statistics with regard to marriage and divorce between America, which is unique, and France, and England, and Germany, Sweden, and Italy. Okay. So what do we call this? There are two kinds of individualism. One is called utilitarian. I mean, you're going to set your goal on what's going to make you happy materially, and you're going to go after it. You have to go after it yourself. That's what it's all about, isn't it? You're trying to be here at the university. You're setting your career. You want to go after it, and you're going to get that. So you can make money, and you can be happy with the money. All right? The other one is what they call expressive individualism. And expressive individualism seeks the best way to satisfy your emotional needs. I feel, I need, I want, and I'm going to go after those needs and satisfy them. Now, both of these kinds of expressionism, individualism, one utilitarian and the other one expressionist, have assumptions underlying them about happiness and how to pursue it. Now, I want you to look at this. When you have set the individual up as the one who is supposed to go after this good, whatever that good is, or focus on the needs of your emotional needs, what's going to happen? Is that going to make you go out of yourself more, or is it going to turn you in upon yourself more? Or are you going to feel a tug of war? You want to go out, but you stay in. You focus on yourself, or you go out. Is it going to increase your narcissism, or is it going to increase your magnanimity for the other? Inherent in our way of life in the United States, we already have a big impediment to self-transcendence in love for the other. Because all the cultural signs say, think about number one first. The individual is number one. And you have to make your own way, materially and emotionally, in life. How do I begin a relationship? How can I find somebody with whom to relate? How can I have my emotional needs satisfied? Who will take care of my needs? Now look what this does to the whole relationship of a committed relationship long term. You think it's going to be long term? Not going to be long term. Why? Your emotional needs are going to change. And as soon as your emotional needs change, if the partner doesn't respond to those emotional needs, ciao, baby. Let's start something else. Let me go someplace else and find someone who will satisfy my needs. Notice, my needs. It blocks our desire for marriage, which is to go out, and throws us back in on ourselves. Me, myself, I, poor pity me, and I, my needs, and who's going to take care of those? The culture itself, therefore, has a toolkit which impedes us from self-transcendence. And when you look at therapy and therapeutic situations, what are people trying to do? They're trying to figure out, how can I be satisfied emotionally? How are my relationships going to satisfy me? And at the same time, I have all these blocks. How can I get out of myself? So it's kind of a schizophrenia that's going on there. You want to get out, but you're going back in. Can't get out, going back in. And who's going to satisfy me? Well, if I just do this, this, and this, maybe the relationship is going to be okay and we can get along. All right. All relationships, therefore, become contractual. They are not covenantal. Covenant means you're going to stick with this all the way to the end. For the most part, relationships become contractual. I will give you this if you give me that. And when you can't give me that, I won't give you this. Therefore, we have to find somebody who can give me this and you that. Individualism is rooted in the presumption that life is all about choices. He makes a big point in this book about choices. Don't you get mad? Don't you get tired of making choices? Oh, every day you have to wake up and make choices about this, about that. What am I going to do? Am I going to go here? Am I going to go there? And all the choices are related in this cultural mindset which says you alone have to make you. And do you know what? The only way, the way that we are made and we make ourselves is in relationship with other people. We get signals about who we are and who we ought to be in our relationships with other people. It's not by ourselves going to Walden Pond or into some Buddhist situation where you cross your legs and you're looking at your belly button. It's not there. It is in the relationships that we come to authenticity and know who we are. So individualism is rooted in the presumption that life is all about choices to satisfy material and emotional needs. So both the American belief in divorce and cohabitation, are rooted in individualism. And this is stronger than the marriage toolkit. That toolkit is stronger. Okay. That's why we talk about no-fault divorce. But you know what it really is, don't you? It is expressionist, individualistic divorce. Because what you're saying is, this is no longer satisfactory for me. I have to seek greener pastures. Therefore, we have no fault. We can get it right away and move on. So, Americans face a situation in which lifestyle choices, which were limited and optional half a century ago, are now mandatory. You must choose again and again and again. And the result is the ongoing self-appraisal. Aren't that what's going on all the time? How am I doing? What's going on? Who am I? How do I feel? What do people think about me? All these kind of things. Everything's going on there, okay? An ongoing self-appraisal of how your personal life is going. Like having a continual readout of your emotional heart rate. You get one of those machines, it's up, down, down, up. You're printing it out, the doctor takes it, tears it off, and said, your emotional heart rate is horrible. You are on the verge of a major crash here. This is explosive kind of infarction that's almost upon you. Okay? As bonds of neighborhood and community weaken, when you don't have a neighborhood, when you don't have a community, people's intimate relationships have become the main setting in which they develop a sense of meaning and identity. So you're looking for your emotional relationships to satisfy everything. You no longer have a community out there. You no longer have a neighborhood in which you know you are a part. And what happens is the only thing is this emotional relationship going to satisfy me? Oh boy. That's really gets sad. It really gets shaky. That's why, last night you said, how can I trust? How can I trust? Big underlying thing. So all these factors create a heightened sensitivity to problems that arise in intimate relationships. And since some problems occur in almost every relationship, in fact, problems occur in every relationship, there oftentimes comes a time when the readout will plunge. And when that occurs, people tend to question their relationships. Now, what were some of the causes underlying having to make all these choices? Well, it was a shift over, first of all, to an attitude of self-development. I have to develop myself. So all of this anxiety rests on your shoulders as to whether you are developing yourself or not. Secondly, the movement of married women into the workforce. Notice, all kinds of choices come up. You're independent with your own salaries and so forth and so on. You can go ahead. You have all kinds of choices lying before you. Thirdly, there was a sharp decline in our country in the economic fortune of young men without college education. Those men who did not go to college didn't have the opportunity to improve and make a career for themselves, which was going to be satisfying. They get in relationships. These relationships break up because they don't have the wherewithal to continue them on. And finally, what we call the technological impact or breakthrough. And what I mean by, and which gives you choices of all kinds, IUD, injectables, implants, medical methods of contraception, the pill, sex, marriage, and love are no longer bound together. Condoms we used all the time, but then came Roe versus Wade, and then you're really in big trouble. Really in big trouble. By the way, when we think of the pill, we think of the reason the people didn't like Humane Vitae is simply because they figured, how can anybody impede me from having enjoyment in my sex life when I want to have it? When you see what that did, culturally, the fallout is you can have sex without marriage, but now we are at a point, because of technological advances, where you can have life without sex. Did you know that? Life without sex. In vitro fertilization, or the implanting of a seed in a sperm in an ovum, a sperm in an ovum in a woman. And then if that isn't enough, If you have a same-sex relationship, one wants to be the mother, the other one wants to be the mother, then what do you do with that? Take, implant it here and then take it out and put it in her, and then two people can be mother. Technology has expanded the choice incredibly, and what it has done, has destabilized any relationships, because now what you have is a succession of relationships in and out. Partnerships change. It's like a dance. Somebody cuts in, somebody cuts out. But the choices are always in constant motion, either up or out. And this is because we have been thrown back on ourselves by the cultural forces and the cultural presuppositions about who a person is and what a person is meant to become. Then he talks about in here what he calls the M factor, the movement factor. Individualism proves and is based on making choices to move up or to move out, and people then live a seeker's existence. You're always seeking something else. Always seeking something else. You never seem to be satisfied. Seeking, what are you seeking? Personal fulfillment. Did you know that 44% of Americans have changed their religious affiliation from the religion in which they were raised? 44%, that's getting pretty close to half. I mean, this is movement, and you got choices, and that's what you're doing. So what are the effects on children? I can't go into this over here. I don't want to take up time, Professor Barbara, over here. But what are the effects of children of this attitude about me and my emotional needs and the choices that I can make now, and separation of, life, love, and marriage, and taking those out of there? Divorce and cohabitation are the results of this individualistic self-development mentality. Both of them come there. Individualism underlies what he calls the marriage go-round. From a child's perspective, experience, now listen to this, experiencing 3 or more parental partnerships would, 3 or more parental partnerships, get that? Would imply a scenario such as being born to a lone mother who later marries the child's father, then divorces him and starts a cohabitating relationship, and then ends that relationship and lives with somebody else. Now, as a typical social scientist, he says this may have an effect on the child's life. May? Has to be very cautious. This is a social scientist. This is scientific work with statistics, and they have to be very cautious in the kind of work that they use. Oh, I know cases like this. I know people who have had a child out of wedlock, then they finally marry the guy, but he takes off, or that it's unsatisfactory, so they cohabit with somebody else. And after they cohabit with somebody else, that's not satisfactory, so it's a third one. So it is the door swings in and the door swings out, and the kid is over there. That's why last night on that DVD, when I saw that kid in the corner, my heart, I just thought, my God, look at that kid, how it's suffering over there. This guy's hollering. No bonding with that kid. The only thing the 2 adults are thinking about is how they're getting their needs satisfied. That's it. The percentage of children who experienced 3 or more mothers' partners by age 15 in the mid-90s was less than 2% in every other country except Sweden, where it was 3%. But in the United States, it was 8%. So about 1 out of 12 American children, 1 out of 12, saw at least this many transitions in their living arrangements. The number of children who experienced exactly 2 parental partnerships is 21%, compared with 11% in Sweden. Now, individualism, utilitarian, expressionist, choices about what's going to make me happy, being thrown back in on the self, technological advances, the pill, Roe versus Wade, you can have an abortion if you have this child out of wedlock, choices, 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 and marriage go round begins, in and out, in and out. You see that we have moved from the individual all the way over to the cultural context in which we are living. And then we come back to your basic question, how do I begin a relationship? Oh, wow. My heart goes out to young people who are trying to make their way in this very mixed up world. To learn what it means to transcend the self in an act of love and think for the good of the other instead of thinking for the good of the self. You know how hard that is? Every system, even a university system, puts it on you, your choice. Which career am I going to take? What am I going to do? What major am I going to choose? What kind of social and economic benefits am I going to receive from this? And how am I going to, I feel so lonely, how am I going to have all of my emotional needs met? So what's the focus of this workshop and our time together? The task of the 21st century is to minimize the unwanted effects of individualism while learning to live with the costs that remain. Boy, that's a big thing, isn't it? It's a big thing. Because, you know, personal choice has both benefits and it has costs. The benefits, it broadens your opportunities for wives to realize their full potential in paid employment and at home. It's made marriage more democratic. But on the downside, it is anxiety provoking. What career to pursue, where to live, whether to marry or not, whether to have children, whether to end the marriage. And this accumulated weight of decision after decision can wear on people. Continual self-monitoring exhausts you. Children and adolescents must deal with the changes their parents decide to make. And those decisions never involve the children. It's the children who become the victims of that. The newer meaning of marriage is deeply rooted in the personal choice-based culture of the current day. Marriage movement people say that the increases in divorce, cohabiting relationships, single parenting, and step-families are likely to stay with us unless we somehow return to the 1950s. Well, we're never going back to the 1950s. Let me tell you, you can't do that. That doesn't mean that you have to, that you don't have to try to reinforce the sanctity of marriage and what marriage is all about and commitment and love. You must do that. But this author makes another point. He says, besides that strategy, to have family-friendly legislation in place in our government, and how you're going to support families and so forth and so on, the author suggests supplementing the marriage message with the new message. Wait until you hear this. Slow down. Before you jump in and out, before the door swings in and out, slow down. And I remember what I learned when I was in the first grade. Stop, look, listen before you cross the street. Use your eyes, use your ears, and then use your feet. That's a description of what it means to be a discerning person. And to be a discerning person means that you have a spiritual life. That you are in love with God, that you understand that God is in love with you. We heard that from Jeff last night, who said, he put it all out there. We hear this. Do we believe it? I'm not sure. The hardest act of faith to make is to believe that you are loved by God or by anybody. That's the hardest act of faith to make. So, we're slowing down here. We're taking a look. And now we understand that everything that you're going to be hearing about from the other speakers is going to be some aspect of what it means to live the Christian life in this cultural context, which is going to challenge you to open your heart and go out instead of stealing it shut in hopes that you find something, and instead you find nothing. I think that's me. I'm done. Okay.